2022 was an interesting year for Path of Exile. A lot of core game systems changed, rare monsters went through several iterations, and loot got a massive overhaul. But what about builds? Today, I'm going to start 2023 by doing a bit of a retrospective on builds in 2022. By going over my 5 top builds from the past year. Now of course, there's going to be some arbitrary rules here. The first of which is, I'm not really going to count things by actual months and days. I don't remember when in a specific league I played a build, so if that league happened at any point in 2022, it counts, i.e. Forbidden Sanctum counts for both 2022 and 2023, because I make arbitrary decisions. And beyond that, what makes the builds best? What's the criteria? The build has to feel good for me to play, and be fun for me to play. Before I get started, a special thanks to my patrons and channel members for the continued support, but more about how you can support at the end. Let's get into it. Starting with number 5, Poisonous Concoction Pathfinder played in Lake of Kalandra. This is honestly the best league starter I've done in a very long time. Thanks in no small part to the fact that you start with a Mageblood. That's right, if you've ever thought, Mageblood, really cool, but I'll never be able to afford it, just play a Pathfinder. You'll have a Mageblood on from day one. You can even use Alchemist Flasks for increased effect, and still have enough flask charges to sustain them permanently. The tech that I really enjoyed discovering on this build was finding out that I could completely res cap myself with a bunch of elemental res flasks, take a bunch of reduced elemental damage, and have a character that felt super tanky and super fast. Now, when I started the build, a lot of people kind of warned me away from it saying, but the single target's low. And okay, if I'm making a YouTube montage of the fastest boss killers in the game, I'm probably not including Poisonous Concoction Pathfinder on the list. But those kind of montages get old really fast, and much like Sirius, I find them to be quite boring and small. So instead, I went with a huge quality of life focus. And out of all the builds on this list, this is one of the 2 I'd most recommend if you wanted to play something right now. Poisonous Concoction Pathfinder got a huge range of buffs with the curse changes. Not only does your poison no longer double dip on deals damage faster to shorten its duration artificially, but it also gains a massive amount of damage from temporal chains, and temporal chains is a great defensive layer both within the Sanctum and outside of it. Plus, if you've ever played with an Explodey effect and thought, how can I crank that up? Well, Pathfinder Prolif is built right into the Ascendancy, and boy does it crank your clear up. This not only lets you kill tanky rare enemies quite easily by magnifying poisons from all the surrounding targets and projecting them onto the single target, but if you're using Growing Hordes, Grand Design, or these days, really anything to increase pack size by large amounts, you're forcing a lot of enemies into close proximity, which gives you a lot of chances to kill everything instantly with Poison Prolif. If I was just going on feels good alone, this would easily be number 1. However, there's a few reasons why this takes number 5. The first of which is, it's the build I invested the least in. Not because I was really unhappy with it, but because I just wanted to play other things, so I never really got to find out how it feels when it's God tier. And for another, there are just some playstyles that are more fun to me. This was fun, I enjoyed it for Lake of Kalandra, and I'm probably not going to do it again anytime soon. Though, your experiences might be different, because everyone finds different things fun. Now, number 4 is also a build I probably won't be playing again, not because I didn't enjoy it, but because it kinda got nerfed several times. And that is the Spectral Helix Crystallized Omniscience Nightblade Raider that I played in Archnemesis. See, back then, I was using Mageblood in a lot of builds, and so people told me, for the last build of a league, you should make something cheap. And I named a character 10 cheap build, and did exactly that, by investing around 400 to 600 divines to make sure almost every aspect of my build was juiced just as much as possible. Because I think when people say we want you to make a cheap build, what they really mean is they want to see my currency tab be completely empty. And don't worry, that's pretty much exactly what happened as a result of playing this character. Now, I'd also been warned for this build that Spectral Helix was a clunky skill and would feel bad. It certainly looked clunky from watching other people play it. And then I realized, Spectral Helix is just a damage over time build with hammers. And if you throw your hammer and let it spiral out as you move on to the next pack, it plays pretty much just like a damage over time build, which, instead of feeling clunky, felt super smooth. Because I was playing Crystallized Omniscience, I wanted to stack as many attributes as possible. Or at the very least, as many attributes as I could get, while also capping my crit, getting as much crit multi as I could, and of course getting increased weapon elemental damage with attacks. plus shoving in all the auras, because who doesn't want to shove in all the auras to make their build even better? What started as a meme boss killer ended up being a pretty darn solid map clearer as well. Sure, the playstyle is an acquired taste, and I can absolutely see why a lot of people might get annoyed, because they want to stand there and hit the enemy until it dies, instead of throwing a hammer, then moving on to the next pack, then throwing another hammer. But if you've played a lot of damage over time builds, and you wanted something that was Raider fast plus Raider smooth, since it's one of the easiest ways to get completely immune to elemental ailments, this was a great build. And unfortunately, that's where the good news ends. Crystallized Omniscience was nerfed. Now, you get less value per stat you stack with Omni. Then, Nightblade was also nerfed. It's no longer getting automatically reset. Does this kill the build? No, absolutely not. Even if it lost half of its damage, POB said I did about 40 mil, Cirrus dying in 3 seconds said I did probably close to 40 mil, and if you cut all those things in half, I don't think killing Cirrus in 6 seconds is really that shabby. Factor in the Omni nerf, maybe we're looking at 9 seconds now. And then of course, Spectral Helix also got a nerf. Its damage was cut significantly, so maybe we're looking at a 20-second Cirrus kill. Which, if you've never played the build before, will still probably feel really awesome. But if you played the old version, going from 3 seconds to 20 seconds feels really bad. And you'll kind of notice a pattern here. When I play a really strong build, it's probably not going to show up on one of these lists again, because it doesn't feel that great to play a worse version of a build you played previously. So for me, Trinity, Spectral Helix, Crystallized Omniscience, Nightblade Raider is going to stay firmly in Archnemesis. Though the next build might get a revisit at some point in the future, because that is Righteous Fire Inquisitor, another build I played in Archnemesis. I wanted a really tanky, fast mapper, the sort of build where I could go AFK or answer a trade whisper without having to worry about the Archnemesis monster killing me. You could argue that I could just not answer my trade messages while fighting an Archnemesis monster, and I'd tell you you're wrong. If my build can't do that, I'm clearly not tanky enough to call myself tanky. At the time, I did things a little bit differently. I approached the build less like a softcore trade Righteous Fire character, and more like a solo self-found hardcore one. Or maybe a trade hardcore one, since I don't think Aegis Aurora is really solo self-found friendly. And at first, I was doing what everyone else was, with Replica Soul Tether. I don't advise doing that, because I noticed I'd have full energy shield, but I'd run out of health. If I took too much damage, my life recovery couldn't keep up, and my energy shield recovery would just scale infinitely with the damage I was taking due to Aegis Aurora and Divine Shield. So once I swapped to a rare belt in the form of a Stygian Vice, the build felt way better, and honestly, way stronger. I went from dying 1 or 2 times when clearing a simulacrum, to being able to do it without an issue and without any deaths. Another thing I got a lot of questions on was why my helmet had increased AoE. Was this just a budget measure? Well, no. I don't really think about budget measures in a lot of cases when it comes to my builds. But remember, I wanted a speedy mapper. I needed to go fast, and I wasn't too concerned about my single target damage, since with Fire Trap, I had enough. And so putting Ink AoE in my helmet was a great way to get a little bit of extra coverage, kill things that much faster, and move on to the next pack by shield charging through. In some ways, having increased AoE is increased damage, because I was shield charging through at a fixed speed, so the larger my AoE, the more time the enemy spent in the damaging effect, thus, the more time my Righteous Fire had to kill the enemy. Is it actually better than Conk Effect for raw damage? Probably not. But again, all I really needed was a speedy mapper. Not that that really stopped me from doing everything of a build, it was so tanky that it ended up being incredible for bossing as well, cause if a bosses can't kill you, it doesn't matter if they take a couple minutes to die. Though speaking of making the entire screen explode and then being able to do bosses, you might like number 2, which is my Wave of Conviction Ignite Elementalist from Forbidden Sanctum. I didn't really go into Forbidden Sanctum saying, oh, I'm probably only going to play 1 or 2 builds and really min-max the crap out of them. But that's kind of just what's happened, because this build has been so good. Good enough that I finally decided it was worth AFKing for 2 hours in a 5-way just to get level 100. Wave of Conviction Ignite has always provided very consistent DPS. Sure, it might not be the exact highest number, but it will almost always give you roughly the same damage per cast, which makes it very good for bossing and very good for mapping. Want to go a little faster when mapping? Just toss on an Obliteration. Want to be really lazy and do bosses? Well, Obliteration isn't ideal, you should really have a +1/+1 weapon. Honestly, unless I'm doing uber bosses, I still just use the Obliteration, because having explosions is fun, and weapon swapping is pretty lame. Now, the other thing I learned about this build was a little experimentation with the item Elevore. When Elevore first came out, like many people, I kind of dismissed it as this is a great leveling item, great item for when you're not geared, but not really good in the endgame. And boy did I underestimate the value of recovery on spell suppression. Especially if your life pool isn't all that massive, recovery on spell suppression is an insane defensive mechanic that will keep your health topped in a lot of high damage situations. It really doesn't matter how much damage you take, it matters the size of a hit you're taking. Because if you're taking infinite 300 damage hits, all from spells, you'll never lose health. If you're taking infinite 10,000 damage hits, you're gonna go splat pretty quickly, unfortunately. And to make this even better, I added more recovery on block with glancing blows. I wanted a build that could do Forbidden Sanctum. I wanted a build that could do mapping, run expedition logbooks, and even kill bosses. Which was kind of a tall order, because Forbidden Sanctum has some very different requirements as opposed to a lot of other builds. But as it turns out, Wave of Conviction Ignite Elementalist excels in all these areas. In fact, there's really no area of the game it doesn't excel at. More and more as I play Path of Exile, I'm less worried about what my max fizz hit says in PoB. I don't really care if a damage number says 5 million, 10 million, or 50 million. Instead, I focus on the gameplay. Because at the end of the day, sure, tens or hundreds of thousands of people might see the PoB. But that doesn't really tell you what a build is or how it plays. And also at the end of the day, I have to keep playing that build, at least long enough to min-max it. And personally, I'm not going to be doing that if it feels terrible. This is why, despite originally wanting to go Hex Blast and finding a lot of damage there, I swapped back to Wave of Conviction. Because sure, I'd be doing more damage if I was playing Hex Blast right now, and I'd also be constantly annoyed at the targeting of enemies. And so for having great quality of life, and being one of the most versatile and consistent all-content builds, Wave of Conviction Ignite Elementalist from Path of Exile 320 Forbidden Sanctum is my number 2 pick of the best builds of 2022. And if you want to know more about Wave of Conviction Ignite Elementalist, check the video up in the card at the top right or down in the description below. Maybe leave a like since you probably like the video if you're still here, and if you want to see more builds for Path of Exile, content for Torchlight Infinite, and much more, do be sure to get subscribed and ring that notification bell to see whenever I upload. And finally, the moment that you've been waiting for, which you probably won't be surprised by, my pick for the number 1 build of Path of Exile in 2022 is CI cast on Crit Forbidden Right as I played it in Sentinel. Let's be honest, Recombinators were broken in the most fun way. And this led to the single highest investment build I've ever played in Path of Exile history. Usually, if I put a Headhunter or a Mageblade on my build, that's going to be the most expensive part of a build. But this time, that wasn't the case. Because originally, I was using a somewhat expensive Fractured Grasping Mail. Then I said, nah, I'm already min-maxing this. In for Chaos, in for a Mirror. Let's really min-max this right, and replace our Grasping Mail with a Val Regalia. For me, a lot of the fun of Sentinel was forcing mods onto items where they clearly didn't belong. Spell suppression on your armor base? You got it. Global defenses on your energy shield chest? Oh yeah, absolutely. A delve drop-only mod on a synthesized ring? Hell yes, sign me up. Though I guess the drop-only mod on a synthesized ring could still be done, since you can now reroll synth implicits. And hey, if you get a Sentinel-specific mod, that's even better. If I had to rate this build out of 10, well, quite frankly, it would be a 12, because it had enough damage to completely trivialize uber bosses. Remember how I said on the RF build, your build isn't tanky if you can't answer trade messages while sitting in your map? Well, your boss killer isn't tanky unless you can answer trade messages while fighting uber bosses. And on CI cast on Crit Forbidden Right, I absolutely could. I had permanent elemental damage reduction. I had almost 10,000 energy shield. I was immune to all chaos damage. I had a ton of armor. And of course, I had a ton of max res thanks to melding of the flesh. This was one of those times where I felt like I won Path of Exile. And so far, it's been the only league where I actually felt it was worth farming uber bosses. Not necessarily for the rewards, and not necessarily for the fights themselves, but because if I'm going to do a boss fight once, I want it to be epic and memorable. If I'm going to do a boss fight 100 times, I want it to be easy and mindless. That's exactly what this build did. Plus, with Ashes of a Stars and alt quality Cyclone, it didn't really feel like I was slow. Didn't really feel like I was a Cyclone build. In fact, if you told me my movement speed was actually increased due to me spinning, I probably would have believed you. Even though, trust me, I checked and it wasn't quite the case. But unfortunately, this is also a build I'll never play again, since, much like with a lot of previous entries, it's been nerfed several times since. Is it still viable? Yes. Is it still one of the best boss killers in the game if you want a tanky build to mindlessly crush Ubers? Absolutely. But it's not as good as it was, and it probably never will be, since I don't ever see recombinators coming back with their full power. But that's okay. Path of Exile is a game about finding your own fun, and it's about enjoying what each unique league has to offer, and then moving on to the next after it's over. But now I'm curious, what was your favorite Path of Exile build in 2022? Was it the build where you finally killed a boss? Was it the build where you finally farmed a headhunter? Or did it just feel really awesome to play? Let me know some of those thoughts down in the comments below. Now, if you're looking for something else to watch, YouTube will have a recommendation on screen right now. Or you can check out any of the builds that I've talked about, as I'll have links to videos for all of them. Personally, one of my favorite things about PoE is the absolutely crazy range of builds that you can make. Some ideas are just objectively bad, and they don't work out. But others seem just crazy enough to work and end up being awesome. And so, as 2023 starts, I'm looking forward to making many more crazy awesome builds, and who knows, maybe I'll even discover something that breaks the meta. But that's it for me today. I hope you enjoyed, maybe you'll learn something, and I hope to see you again sometime soon.